After far too many years spent cast adrift across an endless ocean with no shoreline in sight, a small gust of wind has finally reached the sails of Overwatch. First announced in 2019, Overwatch 2 was originally meant to release as a true sequel, redefining what Overwatch could be by placing emphasis on story and customization with its all-new PvE mission structure. But with turmoil brewing in Activision Blizzard, along with changes in leadership, Overwatch 2's release strategy has changed. With a withering player base and PvE content missing in action, Blizzard has opted to release a free-to-play early access version of the game's PvP mode, complete with new maps, game modes, and heroes, alongside less obvious fundamental changes that have dramatically evolved the essence of the game. This information will be no surprise to anyone still in tune with Overwatch's competitive community, but for those who have dropped off the game at various different points in the year since its release, I found that there haven't really been enough voices accurately depicting how it has changed and whether or not this early release is a good enough reason to jump back into the world of Overwatch. As a longtime fan, I've experienced this game at its best and its worst from both sides of the competitive spectrum. I love Overwatch, and I want this change in the wind to rejuvenate its community, but I also understand that change is polarizing. While I certainly believe in Overwatch 2 after digging deep into its pre-release betas, I can see where certain changes may feel alienating to players that fell in love with an Overwatch that was equally as deep an FPS experience as it was accessible to players more interested in its aspects that made it feel unique from other shooters. So with that, let's answer the question, who is Overwatch 2 really for? The first thing everyone should understand about Overwatch 2 before considering diving in is that yes, this version of Overwatch 2 is not so much a brand new game as it is a soft relaunch of sorts. I think a lot of people look back in the original game's launch with rose-tinted glasses because it was such a new and undiscovered frontier. Everyone remembers the 6 Winstons jumping over the choke in Volskaya Industries, and many believe that the chaos and freedom to create those kinds of situations were what made Overwatch special. Overwatch 2 is not going to be like that, because so much of it isn't brand new. It's an evolution and refinement of the original that has already been tweaked and added to for years. But dismissing it under that consideration misses the big picture. Many of the previous game's core features that were added post-launch, like roll lock, that have subsequently garnered criticism from casual players and critics alike, were a measured response to debilitating problems the game faced. Let's actually take a quick look at roll lock as an example. Back in 2018, when Overwatch allowed players to freely switch to any unselected hero on the roster regardless of role, a new hero was added that promised to shake up the current metagame. Brigitte certainly did that, but not in the way the developers likely intended. Her kit was meant to counter flankers and other mobility-focused heroes, and soon after her release, a new multi-tank, multi-support metagame developed around the high volume of area of effect healing abilities that pushed not just flankers, but all DPS heroes out of the meta entirely. Many DPS heroes were altered to try to compete with this new style of play, but the objective-based nature of the game ensured that they couldn't keep up with this new damageless team composition. I think it's safe to say that any meta in a game like Overwatch that features the same makeup of heroes played on every single map is a bit problematic for the game's longevity, and so the developers felt forced to respond. They could either continue to buff DPS heroes to an outrageous level of power creep, or gut all synergy between the current meta heroes to bring them in line. But after both strategies failed to solve the issue, the devs ended up settling on a different solution entirely that solved the problem for all types of players. In reality, this oppressive meta strategy was rarely being effectively utilized outside of the highest echelon of competitive play. While the vast majority of players were still utilizing team compositions without Brigitte and multiple tanks, the DPS heroes that had been buffed to compensate were reigning absolute terror in the lower ranks, ruining the experience for the type of player whose voice usually goes unheard. A 2-tank, 2 DPS, and 2 support composition lock ensured that almost every hero could maintain their identity and synergies without ruining the game for others, which was the initial goal. It also stabilized the average match quality. Players proficient in only one role could simply queue up for exactly what they felt the most comfortable playing. A godsend for competitive play. No longer did players have to worry about queuing into a lobby with 4 support mains on their team, only to be rolled by an opposing team of DPS players. Not only that, but many lessons were learned with the introduction of role lock. The GOATS meta, as it came to be called, was merely a symptom of a much larger problem. As more heroes with stacking effects are added to the game, its identity can change in unforeseen ways, sometimes for the better, but in Overwatch's case, more often for the worse. And competitive players are more than likely to optimize the fun out of the game to win. Role lock's introduction was also an admission that tank, the least popular role in Overwatch, held arguably the highest amount of impact on the outcome of a match. Tank was a problematic role that needed to be addressed because the natural synergies between its heroes were often much stronger than any of their individual impact. The most important shift, however, that came with role lock's introduction was a shift in design philosophy that indicated the developers were done designing the game the way they thought it should be played, instead choosing to accommodate how all players were actually playing it. And that is why I'm so excited for Overwatch 2. So what exactly does Overwatch 2's PvP refresh offer that makes it worth giving Overwatch a second chance? Well, it's pretty much exactly as it sounds, a complete refresh. Overwatch 2 was taken as an opportunity to address multiple key problems the previous entry faced at various points in its life in ways that simply could not be done with that version. The first problem was merely queue times. DPS has historically been the most popular role in Overwatch, followed by support and then tank, making it difficult to create fair matches without having players wait a frankly unreasonable amount of time due to the shortage of tank and support players. The second problem was the overwhelming amount of crowd control, or CC for short, creeping into the game over time.
Can I play? Can I play a fucking game, dude?
For a while, it seemed as though every new hero was equipped with some sort of stun, disable, or displacement ability that weren't fun to interact with because they took too much control away from players. Last but not least was the snowbally nature of the game. Certain game modes and maps were originally intended to require constant communication, coordination, and frequent hero swapping. But the vast majority of players didn't engage with the original game in this way, causing a lot of frustration and toxicity. These are the key issues Blizzard's Team 4 decided to focus on. And to their credit, the solutions they've brought to the table have had an immense effect while effectively staying as true to Overwatch's original vision as practically possible. The biggest and most contentious change was the shift from a 6 vs 6 format to 5 vs 5, removing one tank player from each team. The initial reaction to this change was extremely negative, as the synergy between tank partners was one of the more widely appreciated aspects of the game. Yet, in practice, you can really feel the benefits of such a change on multiple levels. Tank was an extremely unpopular role in Overwatch for a number of reasons. For one, it was a fairly high-pressure position. As the spearhead of the teamfight, eyes from both teams are predominantly spent fixed on the tanks. While effective tanking could easily dictate the pace of a match, mistakes made as the tank player were unforgiving and costly due to the high volume of spam damage and CC abilities constantly being thrown in your direction. While the chemistry between tank characters was a fun dynamic, the majority of heroes within the role lived and died by these synergies. When one team had an optimal tank pairing and the other did not, match quality most often tanked. One game you might be pummeling the enemy with an oppressive double shield spam composition, where the next your tank partner is an out of voice chat flanking Roadhog, providing little to no support. Thus, the average tanking experience was extremely volatile and frustrating. Removing a player from the equation, on the other hand, helps reduce queue times while eliminating a lot of the random frustration, subsequently streamlining the experience for all players in the lobby. For the tank player, their role instantly becomes more impactful. With one less tank on the field, that's less incoming damage and CC being thrown their way, and there are fewer angles they need to cover. It simplifies the action in a way that is frankly welcome after 7 years of pure, original Overwatch chaos. But the truly underrated outcome of such a change is how tank heroes have been updated to compensate. With oppressive tank synergies dominating lobbies no longer a worry, most, if not all, the tanks have been giga-buffed to individually bring them closer in line with the power level of other heroes. Tanks simply have more staying power and playmaking ability, enabling their teammates in more individually satisfying ways. Playing tank actually makes you feel like a tank now, instead of a punching bag with 600 HP. It's not only fun for tank purists, but also the types of players who reluctantly played tank because nobody else wanted to. I've never had more fun playing Reinhardt than I have in Overwatch 2 because his charge can now be cancelled, making the pursuit of a more aggressive playstyle less punishing. Some tanks have even had their kits completely reworked. The once passive and team-dependent Orisa has a much more active playstyle, rushing down foes with her high survivability and increased mobility. Her often underutilized Halt ability has been replaced with a much more visceral feeling thrown javelin that deals damage and interrupts enemy abilities. While it's reasonable to assume that the removal of one tank results in increased pressure being placed on the remaining player, I've actually found the opposite to be true in most cases. Because multiple angles of the team fight could be occupied by either tank in Overwatch, the safest strategy often involved dealing with one of the opposing tanks first, focusing them down with overwhelming damage and CC. However, the giga buff to tank's health pools and damage mitigating abilities can make focusing the tank inefficient in more situations. And that's without even taking into account the reduced ultimate charge players receive from dealing damage to them due to the new role passive system. As the DPS, it more often makes sense to take flank angles or look for long-range picks on the enemy backline due to the decreased presence of shields, enhancing the interactions between DPS and the other roles. I used to think I was pretty decent at Hanzo until I played Overwatch 2. With far less tank health pools and shields needed to be spammed down, playing Hanzo requires actual mastery over sniping. You definitely feel like you're having less impact when you're not landing shots, which may be a point of contention for some players, but when so much of the extra fat and feature creep has been trimmed from the game, it feels so much more rewarding to interact with the enemy team. This also plays hand in hand with the reduced amount of crowd control abilities and their effectiveness across the board. Overwatch 2 was made for the type of player who quit Overwatch when heroes that relied heavily on their CC, like Sombra, Doomfist, and Brigitte, rose to prominence. DPS heroes specifically, like Mei, Cassidy, and Sombra, have been reworked to limit their more frustrating interactions without gutting their power or identity. Mei can no longer completely lock down an enemy with her freeze, but her primary fire can still slow and deal significantly more damage, while Cassidy has had his flashbang completely replaced with a magnetic grenade that deals devastating burst damage. One of the most exciting changes to me is the reworking and role swapping of Doomfist, a character completely reliant on his displacement abilities from DPS to tank. The new Doomfist has me convinced that he always should have been a tank, and is a statement on the consistency of each role in Overwatch 2, as most of the remaining CC has been shifted to tank and support heroes. Tank has become the de facto crowd control role, while DPS is more focused on providing follow-up damage or catching out poorly positioned targets, resulting in an overall reduction in CC while still maintaining the identity of heroes that revolve around it. However, this leaves the support category in an interesting position. Changes to CC is just one of several factors that leave supports in a bit of an underwhelming state. While tanks have received sweeping changes, and DPS has received a new hero and several adjustments in the pre-release betas, supports were pretty fairly balanced in Overwatch, resulting in the role receiving far fewer changes and no new heroes in the playtests. While their CC abilities haven't been completely removed, some of them have been reduced in power, namely Ana's Sleep Dart and Brigitte's Shield Bash. In conjunction with the lack of a second friendly tank, these changes leave supports much more vulnerable to flankers and other DPS, Perhaps more than any other role, the optimal support playstyle has changed significantly without incorporating many of the bells and whistles the other roles have to attract new players. Purely focusing on healing and enabling teammates while hiding from enemies is way less viable than it was in the original Overwatch. Playing support in Overwatch 2 requires players to spend more time defending themselves from flankers while also using their abilities more proactively to have an impact. The one change all supports have received in response to their more vulnerable state is the new self-healing passive ability, easily the strongest and most impactful of the new role passives. Similarly to Mercy's old passive, every support hero now receives healing over time after not taking damage for a few seconds. Don't worry, Mercy's is a bit stronger now to compensate. Personally, I love how this affects a hero like Ana because it facilitates more of a playmaking style. On average, Ana players will have to use their biotic grenade on themselves far less by properly playing around cover. While this works for me, the type of player that derives satisfaction from the FPS elements of Overwatch, I do worry that support players that fell in love with heroes like Mercy will feel alienated by the new demands of the role. If you're this type of player, Overwatch 2 might not be for you. Regardless of one's preference for or against the new playstyle, it's hard to argue that support doesn't feel like the most undercooked role of the three headed into Overwatch 2's launch, as the developers themselves have admitted, and queue times clearly reflected that in the pre-release betas. The release of the new hero Kiriko should absolutely help reduce queue times, but her advertised kit appears to have just as high a skill floor as your skill ceiling. Don't get me wrong, she looks amazing, and I absolutely believe the support role could use more mechanically demanding heroes like her, but I also wouldn't be surprised if a sizable portion of the current support player base doesn't quite gravitate to her the same way they embraced heroes like Brigitte and Moira. In any case, the support role will need to keep receiving attention from the development team to continue attracting new players, probably even more so than tank at this point. With all that considered, one of the most common complaints I hear from casual players regarding why they originally fell off of Overwatch actually doesn't have anything to do with hero balance. It's that the game mode sucked. And honestly, I agree. While the game was objective-based, there simply weren't many interesting ways to interact with the objective, and many of the maps that placed more focus on it were despised by players. That's why I'm so excited the developers have chosen to replace the Assault mode with Overwatch 2's new game mode, Push, and I think you should be too. Assault was a deeply flawed mode, evident by the amount of changes it received over the course of Overwatch's life. While it had the potential to produce some exciting interactions at high levels of play, Assault required an unreasonable amount of coordination for the average player to enjoy, most often resulting in unsatisfying draws and frustrating snowballs. Push and its map design, on the other hand, provides a mode with a low skill floor yet high skill ceiling, rich with strategic depth. Push is like a reverse game of tug of war. Both teams fight over the same moving objective, escorting a robot that pushes a barrier from the center of the map to the enemy's initial spawn point, with forward spawns opening and closing depending on the position of the bot. It's similar to Escort in that way. But the added depth comes from the fact that both teams have to play offensively and defensively all over the course of a single round, making the objective more interesting to interact with for both teams. As the defenders in Escort, there's not much more you can do with the objective than momentarily contest or win the team fight on top of it as it slowly inches itself back. On the other hand, Push presents unique opportunities, like sniping the bot during a losing team fight to delay the opposing team's advance should they happen to overextend. As a team, you can even choose to stop pushing the bot at all to take a team fight in the most advantageous position of the map, so long as you've already pushed the barrier further than your opponent. Situations like these did have a tendency to pop up in Escort, but never for both teams. I know there was some hesitancy from the community to accept Push because its first rendition felt a bit snowballing, but since the developers have made slight changes to it, I believe that it has the potential to be Overwatch's most interesting game mode, as it requires players to actually think about the objective rather than just sitting on it while the rest of your team spawn camps the enemy. It's clearly still being figured out, and this only scratches the surface of what is possible. But if this is any indication of how future game modes will be designed, then I think we're in good hands. At the very least, it absolutely beats out Assault, even with little to no team coordination because of its symmetrical map design. Just like Control, any defender's advantage is merely one avenue to interact with on maps that provide plenty of flank routes and equal footing. Push is fun. It exemplifies the development team's new philosophy of developing the game in response to players' habits, and I think more people will start to realize this when competitive play opens up and players feel more motivated to coordinate and make more strategic decisions than just throwing themselves on the objective. That's about as much as I want to cover related to Overwatch 2's PvP refresh. I won't be going deep into the monetization issues because that information is readily accessible, and I believe those decisions are ones players need to make on their own. What I will say is that when executed properly, I believe the free-to-play Battle Pass model has proven to work. And if the original Overwatch's monetization is anything to go by, Team 4 will likely pivot from one of the least predatory loot box models to one of the most fair battle passes. There's still a lot more we don't know. But what we do know is that the developers have put forth a considerable effort to enact meaningful, fundamental changes to Overwatch's structure that reward skill expression, empower players, and reduce the amount of frustrating occurrences that ran rampant through the original Overwatch for far too long. This has all simply been a response to continuous player feedback. So to answer my initial question, if you find yourself occasionally logging into Overwatch because there's no other game like it, but are quickly put off by the sheer amount of randomness and toxicity, I wholeheartedly recommend giving Overwatch 2 a chance. It's done a lot to bring the overall experience closer in line with other competitive shooters. But if you're a player who really values the original's accessibility, gravitating to less mechanically demanding heroes like Orisa, Mercy, and Brigitte, Overwatch 2 might not scratch that same itch the original did. If you're still nostalgic for completely unrestricted, absolutely chaotic, post-launch Overwatch, this may not be the game for you, as it's designed to be played for a long time, not a flash in the pan. If you've never played Overwatch, there is a beautiful game at your fingertips, rich with some of the coolest and most polished character designs in the industry. And even if you're only marginally interested, it's free, so there's really no harm in giving it a try. Just be prepared to potentially expose yourself to a crippling addiction that no other game can satiate, causing you to spend hundreds of hours chasing a competitive high that fluctuates naturally in accordance with the random nature of multiplayer matchmaking, while neglecting personal and professional obligations to achieve said high, like I have. Have fun!